Okay, so we are back and it's time for the monthly live chat with Lynn Acton, who will be joining us here in a moment. This month, we're going to talk about young horses, and not just young horses, but starting off from the time that horses are born, from the time they're foals. Lynn has a lot of good information to share with us on how that early phase in a horse's life can really significantly affect their long-term trainability as well as their chances of thriving. But I think it's that piece about trainability that I'm hoping we spend some time speaking about. But letting Lynn get connected. Looks like you're on, Lynn. How's the audio?
I'm here. Hello.
Hey. So I was just reminding listeners about the topic, young horses, and that includes, in this case, baby horses, from the time they come out of the womb, I think, which is what I'm hoping that you're going to lead us off with. And then maybe we'll kind of be progressive about this, and I can give some ideas about the physical and, kind of emotional training that I've seen over years of having to train people's young horses and the challenges and rewards that are involved with that. So starting from the beginning, I know you have a lot of you've done some research on this. So where do you want to point us to get things going?
Well, let's start with when they're babies. Um, horses are a horse's whole life is influenced by how he's handled and the experiences that he has when he's very young. This is really well known with dogs and even cats, but somehow people seem to overlook with horses that everything we do with them when they're young is going to have a lifelong impact. And if we want to have that trainability you're talking about and the reliability that comes from a horse who is confident and comfortable with himself, comfortable with people, and able to learn, then we need to set him up for that, starting right from the beginning. And for success, we want to have we want to be meeting horses' social and emotional needs. That's what makes the difference between having a confident, reliable adult horse with good social skills and learning ability compared to a horse who's fearful and spooky and has people looking for calming supplements and desensitizing programs. A lot of common practices that people have in handling foals are based on pressure and control. These cause fear. What we really want to be causing are the positive emotions of the social bonds that horses feel with each other, starting with the mother, and then with other horses, and then also we want them to feel those bonds of emotional connection with us, because that's what makes for the best, most reliable partners. But they also need to have curiosity. They need their curiosity to be stimulated, because that's part of learning, and they need to play. And I'm sure that you see the impact one way and another in a horse's physical abilities based on whether he's had experiences that he can get out and play and move. So we're looking at trying to encourage the positive emotions and avoid the negative emotions of fear, panic, and grief. Those are the ones that really cause a lot of trouble. So that we can have a horse who just assumes that the world's a great place, looking for the next adventure, and assuming that all the people he meets are going to be wonderful, and we're all going to be friends, and we're all going to get along together. So I kind of I lined up about there's 5 ways when I kind of distilled out what can we do to make things better for horses. There's 5 things that I see really make a horse a happy, reliable adult who is ready to go into training, and looks at the trainer with, well, everybody else in my life's been good, so I'm assuming you will be too, and I'm just ready for whatever you have to offer me now. And these 5 things are opportunities to play. So I'm just going to give you the list, the overview of the list, and then we'll go into a little detail. And I've got some pictures, if we can make screen share work, that we can, in fact, I'll get that started right now. So we just can have a nice little picture to look at, I hope.
Yeah, it should be allowed. I think I checked the right box on my end.
Okay. And do you see a picture?
I see a whole bunch of pictures. I think we just need to. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
I think it's
Oh, there
happening.
we are. All
Oh,
right. So here we
that's
are. So, the overview is we want to offer horses opportunities to play, older socialized companions, encourage their curiosity, teach them basic life skills and manners in a positive way, so that we're modeling what they want and using positive reinforcement rather than using pressure and control. And this might be the most important single thing: wean on the mother's schedule, not on the human schedule.
Mm.
So this is Tiger, a Dartmoor foal, playing with his mom, his early play by himself. But horses also need to play with each other if that's possible, have another foal, and have objects to play with too. Play is not frivolous. It may sound like we should be doing something more useful. Play actually changes the brain. It develops social skills, and it improves resilience. And I'm sure, Jack, that you'll be able to talk about the physical benefits that come from a horse being able to run and play and use his body. I'm sure he develops more agility, more body awareness and balance from being able to move rather than one who's more confined.
Lynn, maybe you're going to get into this in more depth in a second, and I don't mean to cut you off, but you mentioned wean on the mother's schedule, not on our schedules. Did you want to say more about that now, or are you going to cover that in a, because I have questions about that.
Oh, good. Well, I'm then I saved that for last because I think it's probably the most important.
Okay, perfect.
And if our time is going well, I have a story to tell that gives you sort of an image of the ideal way to go about that is really stress-free.
Oh, cool.
So we lead up to that because everything I'm talking about now should be happening while the foal is still with his mother.
Okay.
And then continuing on beyond that as much as possible. So here, and the next, oops, nope. So here we have 3 mares and 2 foals. So we have 2 foals who have the chance to play with each other, but we also have older, well-socialized horses. So there's 2 mares who are their mothers, and the 3rd mare doesn't have a foal, so she's the auntie. Another foal, another mare that the foals can go to, who offers reassurance and nurturing. And it's really important for horses to have these other adults in their lives because they not only provide nurturing and reassurance, they teach subtle social skills that horses need in order to form bonds and avoid aggression. And interestingly, they need to teach personal space. It's not the mother's job to teach a full personal space. What she teaches him is, when in doubt, plaster yourself to my side because this is where safety is. Mm-hmm. So she's not teaching stay an appropriate distance away from me. So that's one of the social skills that other horses are really needed to teach. Without that, horses don't know how to play, how to get along with each other, and how to avoid aggression. Mm-hmm. And this is Tiger again in the front, and he's with his extended family there. 2 other mares who don't have foals, and 3 geldings who are his big playmates.
I see some good hooves in these photos too. Some nice barefoot horses.
Yeah, they're nice.
I know.
So the next piece of this is encouraging curiosity. Curiosity is a learning thing. And this shows investigative behavior. Tiger has been allowed to walk onto this tarp by himself. Nobody's dragging him along with a lead. Nobody's forcing him to do this. So this turns this from a potentially anxiety-producing exercise into curiosity, which is a learning exercise, and actually is going to make him feel a sense of accomplishment because he's gotten over little bit of worry about that. Now he's standing on it. He gets to investigate it. And then, oh, while we're going around investigating new things, we can leave mom and my friends and go out and inspect this trailer. The upshot of this was when Tiger had his first trailer ride to my place to play with agility equipment, it was a totally stress-free event because he taught himself to load. He satisfied himself the trailer's not anything scary. So this is just an example of the kinds of things that horses learn on their own if we give them the chance to. We've given them a chance to exercise their curiosity. We can let them play with all kinds of things. Let them play with pitchforks, water buckets, stuffed toys. Stuffed toys are kind of cool to horses because they have little faces on them. So there's really something to investigate there. Grooming kits, anything that you don't mind them making a little bit of a mess of that they can't get hurt on. All of these things are fair game to help develop their little brains into an attitude of, gee, there's something new. Instead of assuming it's scary, something new is probably a cool toy to go play with. You can even, I've known people who even put out an old saddle in their paddock. The saddle you're not using anymore, let the horse check that out and play with it. Mm-hmm. You can also take them for lead line walks to give them a chance to observe the world. This is in contrast to desensitizing programs like sacking a foal out, which is an absolutely horrible idea because that creates fear. And any fear that's created in a young horse can have a lifelong impact. This is how we get fearful horses as adults.
Can I ask something on that note, Lynn? Obviously, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I also wanted to ask you, do you also think that sometimes this over kind of desensitizing that sometimes happens with foals, I think I've seen it in some cases create a horse that's just kind of numb, to be honest. They're like so desensitized that they're kind of hard to train. I've seen that in some cases where in my opinion, the horse has just been so coddled and fussed with and had stuff put on them, and it's hard to get any responsiveness from the horse. Have you seen that, or do you have opinions about that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge issue because what you're seeing is a horse who has been desensitized in a way that creates fear rather than letting him explore on his own pace and determine that something's not scary. It's been done to him. So instead of a learning process, it's something done to him. And then it's done until he's so scared that he shuts down. And what you're seeing then is a horse who's shut down. This is learned helplessness. And he's shut down. So he's tuning the world out because it's just overwhelming. And so the only way to get him to tune back in is to give him lots of positive experiences that show him the world is actually a good place and he can trust people. And that can take a long time. Horses start out very sensitive. We want to leave it that way and let them do their learning on their own pace because the desensitizing it creates what you're saying. Or if it doesn't get to that stage, then they're at the stage where everything's scary. Because, like any minute now, somebody could come at me with this tarp or this plastic bag or this other thing that they're waving and swinging around. And I can't trust anybody to just behave sensibly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Teaching basic life skills. This can be happening. Again, people want to use people tend to think they need to have control over the foal. Well, we better get control of him while he's small enough that we can physically control him. And the problem with that is that if you're trying to control the horse through force or pressure, then he's trapped. And this is scary. And now he associates people with scary things. So if you want the horse to learn about the world, let him watch. So this is Spotted Saddle Horse Rambler, who is hanging out while his mother's ridden. So he's learning by observing that being ridden is a normal part of life because his mom's cool with it. So it's not going to be any sort of surprise to him. And this is little Shay. Now, you see Nicole has her arms right around her. And for some foals, it would be scary to have somebody wrap their arms around them and make the foal feel trapped. But in this case, Shay is accustomed to going up to people and getting scratched. So people are good. They pass out scratches. And so if Nicole puts her arms around her and scratches her with both hands, that's even better. But meanwhile, she does have her arms around her. So if something happens and you need to restrain a foal, her first feeling is not, I'm trapped. It's like, well, this is a person who's good to me. And so there's really nothing to worry about here. And each new thing they need to learn can start with either examples and modeling and positive reinforcement. And scratches tend to be really good positive reinforcement for foals. So you don't even have to have the discussion of, are we going to give them treats? Just go for scratches. Most of them seem to fall for that very happily. So, and teaching them just to be handled. And then the next step is to lead. And you can do that by leading them while they're still walking with mama. That's a good time for the leading practice to start. And encourage them to synchronize with your body language. That's a game that foals naturally play with each other. And that that's something they naturally do with their mothers. So if you use that synchronizing, they can learn to lead very quickly on a loose lead. And I'm sure that's safer. I'm sure you've seen horses who've had injuries to their necks from being pulled around too roughly on leads.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is Tiger again, playing with the big boys, and he has instigated the play here. And so now I'm going to get to the weaning thing, which it really is. It's a very crucial thing. Did you have a specific question on that, Jack?
No, I'm sure you'll cover it. I was just wondering different time frames that you've come across that where it does happen, kind of naturally more on the mother's schedule as opposed to ours. I think I'm pretty accustomed to hearing people wean at 5 to 6 months when we decide it's time. But I'm just curious what you have found.
Well, the research is really clear on this. There is no controversy. The healthy thing is to wean on the mare's schedule, which typically is somewhere around 8 months. And then the mare indicates that she's ready to wean by making herself less available for the foal to nurse. And if we're assuming now that he's had these companions we've talked about, then he's had friends to go off exploring with, to play with, and he's not depending on mom for all of his social time or all of his reassurance. So he's taking more and more steps to be away from his mother. He's going away further. He's spending more time away from her. So he's getting ready. He's developing his independence and self-confidence. So mom kind of knows, she knows when she's ready. She seems to know when her foal is ready. And then she indicates it's time. But if we interrupt that and wean before the mother is ready, then we have separation, which the foal feels as abandonment. And this abandonment triggers panic, which is all the screaming that people seem to have decided is normal, that the foal's just going to scream and scream and scream for his mother. Well, from his point of view, he's screaming, he needs help, he needs nurturing, he's terrified, and nobody comes. And you wouldn't do that to a human child. We wouldn't, it's very obvious that would be traumatic. And when the foal stops screaming and people say he's gotten over it, he hasn't gotten over it. He has gone from panic to grief, and he's now grieving the loss of his mother. And this reduces the opioid activity in his brain because he's got all these bad feelings in his going through his body now. And this is why stereotypies start. They start weaving or cribbing because those release some of the opioids they're not getting. And even if they don't have stereotypies, they're not getting over it. This grief now alters their brain and sensitizes them to separation anxiety for the rest of their life.
Hmm.
And when we think about how many horses have separation anxiety issues, um,
Mm.
this is really
Yeah.
a very, very huge issue. And this is where we get the adult anxiety and spookiness.
As you're talking us through this, which is really important, it really is underscoring for me the challenges that a quote backyard breeder would have, because so much of what you've just presented is dependent on having a small herd, for that socialization, for, when the natural weaning process happens, the foal already has some buddies built in, and it can all kind of happen naturally. I think the breeding of horses should be taken should be thought out a lot for these reasons, because it's just really highlighting for me the importance of having a small herd to do this right. Would you agree with that?
Um, yes, I think, nobody has, or very few people have the ideal situation. So what I'm describing is what ideally we would want to do, and
Mhm.
we can only do the best we have with the resources we have. So somebody who doesn't have a little herd, then you get one older babysitter. All it takes is one older babysitter to improve the mental health of the horse and let mama wean.
Okay.
So just putting those things, and then the other things that you do with the horse, like encouraging their curiosity, and teaching them life skills with modeling and positive reinforcement. Anybody can do that. That's more a matter of mindset than it is like brilliant long-term horsemanship skills.
Mhm.
You have to be willing to look at what is the full feeling, so that you're watching his emotions, and if his body language is showing you he's feeling positive emotions, then you're on a good track. So yeah, and a herd is ideal, but if you have to borrow one old babysitter horse, then that can be done and that can work.
Mhm. Okay.
So I'm sure you have some things to share with us with as far as the physical development. But if we have time, I'd like to tell you the story of Tiger's weaning, which is an example of making it work nicely.
I think we will have time, so we'll circle back around to that, because I think we're about halfway
Sure.
through. So yeah, I think that what you've presented is so important, because I I think most of us, because of financial means, if we are going to go purchase a horse, we don't typically look for a baby, at least if you have to board the horse. If you don't have the luxury of keeping it in your backyard, then you have to pay board for, a lot of years before you can ride the horse. So typically, most of my students will go in search of a horse that's 5, 6 years old, and who knows what the early years were like. And I think what I want to help people understand, and I want to understand better it myself, is the trainability of a horse. And what I try to do with horses to help them use their body better, it is so contingent on what all this early process that you just walked us through, how all that went for them. You can
Yes.
you can take your horse to the best trainer in the planet, but if the horse is just has a deep anxiety, or is not well socialized, or is not mentally engaged in the tasks, we we can't get past any of that to the task we're trying to teach the horse to do, be it dressage, jumping, trail riding, whatever. So it is like 90% of the journey is like, what has their lifestyle been to this point? And
It's
so important.
it's
And
true. Yeah. And I think people have hugely underestimated this. But I'm starting to hear people say, I'm looking at how this horse was raised. People who will travel much longer distances because they've seen that a foal was raised in a really positive way. And now they know that they're off to a good start and they won't have a lot of blips along the road from poor handling early on.
yeah, that's wonderful to hear. So just quickly for listeners, I do have an article. It was in the Canadian Horse Journal last year, and I think it's called something like Conditioning Young Horses or something. It's on my website for free. You can go check it out. And it does draw on the research that has been done to show that a light amount of exercise is needed in the horse's like 2 and 3-year-old years, in order to create ligaments and tendons that are very resilient. So if and when a horse maybe is just in a pasture and maybe it has this good lifestyle like you just described for us, Lynn, it has buddies and it has open terrain and hopefully varying terrain, some mud, some hard ground, some soft ground, because that's really the best. Like they don't need to stand on ideal footing. They need the opposite. And so even if they have all that, but they don't have a little bit of structured exercise, the tendons and ligaments don't make the same adaptation to exercise. So what that means is later in the horse's life, when they go into full work and exercise, they won't have like full athletic capacity in the same way they would if they had a little bit of stimulus in the 2 and 3-year-old years. And again, little bit is literally little bit, like maybe it's 10 minutes 3 times a week, or maybe a couple of sessions here and there throughout the month. It's not obviously the same kind of training you would do with your older horse, but I kind of spell that out in the article. Again, the purpose is as these fibers are developing, when we can load a little bit of stimulus on them, they develop the aptitude to be able to tolerate really hard workloads and not fail later in life. And so that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool because a lot of people don't want to work their young horse because they don't want to injure it, which is a terrific mindset to have. You don't want to overdo things. And there are certain things that are harmful that would be like requiring the horse to be in a certain body frame, like putting side reins and restricting his posture or doing a lot of repetitive circling. Like we don't want to do those kinds of things, but you can certainly hand walk your horse. You can pony them from a buddy horse. You can maybe come up with some of these, games or activities that you're had a photo of there, Lynn, some obstacles, and that can all count. It just needs to be like a continuous stimulus, because running around a pasture is terrific when they play, but a lot of times it's just really short bursts and it's kind of erratic. There's no rhythm there. And these soft tissue structures really do need like a predictable rhythm to make the adaptations that we want.
And
So go
that
on.
makes perfect, because this sort of mimics what would happen in natural circumstances in a wild herd. The herd moves and the foals walk along, and so they're walking along and not required to do circles, not required to trot and canter a bunch, but it's a lot of walking on a lot of different terrain.
Yeah, and that, increasingly people are talking about proprioception, which tickles my heart. But a huge part of this comes from living out on ground that's not like manicured, and hoof health too is very dependent on having those variable surfaces, pebbles and grass and hard ground, soft ground, the whole gamut, and moving around on it and improving proprioception. That really sets the horse up for a nice athletic career, regardless of what that's going to be. So I guess if you could show the first slide, Lynn. So that's just some general comments about young horses. And then one of the challenges I think we face when we trainers face, or perhaps, if you're starting your own young horse under saddle, for safety reasons, many people will be in a round pen or a small arena. The downside of that is the horse, for one, should not do repetitive circling. There's so many great studies that have come out, especially in the last 2 years, to show how repetitive circling can create deep asymmetry in the back muscles, the supporting back muscles. So you want to have some wide open spaces to work your young horse. And if they've had a good, healthy upbringing, like Lynn just described, being in a big open space should not be a dramatic affair with a young horse. If they have a ton of anxiety, especially separation anxiety, then going in a big open space could be a pretty terrifying experience. But the problem with small spaces, and this slide illustrates it perfectly. This was a young horse that came to my barns, 4 years old. He'd been broke to saddle, but as you can see, he'd never learned to organize his body. I mean, this horse is so hollow, super sweet horse. I mean, he was a kind horse. He really tried hard. But this photo is, his eye is relaxed, but his back is really dropped. You can see the horse just pulling himself forward with those bottom neck muscles and chest muscles. You can see in the hind legs, there's no distance between the hind legs. He's not with the hind limbs. He's not driving underneath his mass. He's kind of just, the hind legs are pedaling underneath his pelvis. It's not good, healthy movement. So he's not structurally in a good place to carry a rider. And this horse had been worked in, really small areas, small indoor arenas, round pens, and that sort of thing. And then you can click to the next slide, Lynn. And so that's kind of I'm trying to encourage people to get out of the round pen a bit more with their young horses. And so this is that same horse about 4 weeks later, and it's not like night and day, but we do see some changes here, especially if you look at his hind legs. There's considerably longer step happening with his hind legs. And then the appearance over his posture is just a nice, gentle arch. And this horse doesn't have side reins or anything. I just have a cavesson. I'm certainly not forcing him in any kind of a frame. And I started working this horse in a big open, a lot of straight lines, a lot of just helping him find a healthier posture. And I just can't underscore that enough, that needs to be the emphasis before a horse specializes. So many people think if they want to ride jumps or 3-day eventing or whatever it is, that they have to send the horse to that specific trainer. And really, a horse just needs to learn how to, be okay in the world and how to have rhythm and carry a rider in good balance. Like, never mind the specializing. Let's just get this horse in a good, comfy balance. I can't emphasize that enough. And then later, you can take your horse to a specialist if that's what you want to do. So getting out of small, tiny spaces for horses, for young horses, is so important. It's counterproductive to put them in small areas, in my opinion, and shut off the world, because it just makes them more anxious. And then if you could go to the last slide I sent you, that next one, Lynn. And then to keep in mind, so when a horse has, so that's that same gray horse on the right hanging out with my horse there on the left. If you can keep in mind, like, if a young horse has had the kind of upbringing that you just described, Lynn, it becomes very challenging to take them from that healthy environment and put them into like a boarding situation or a training situation. I mean, it can be kind of fraught. You really want to make sure there's not this stark transition. So many times, if a young horse has lived out in pasture and he has buddies and he roams around and plays with things, and then it's time to start real life, quote unquote, and he goes to a boarding facility or training facility. Most boarding or training facilities, they're going to have to live in the smaller area. They may not have buddies. They might have this very rigid schedule they're not used to. And all of that can create so much stress. And at the same time, they're like on this timeline, and the owner's like, well, he's been there 30 days. What has the horse learned? So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make that transition really smooth. Like, to try to keep that good thing going that they've had in those early years. And I try to do that for the training horses I have. This socializing that's happening here in this picture, this is as important to me as whatever, training I might do on their back, because if they're not in a good mind state, I can't get anything done. So really think about that if you're going to send your horse off for a trainer, even if it's an exceptional trainer. It's kind of like, what's the setup of the horse? That would be my advice. And I think
That's really
I think those are my main points. Yeah, so I could turn it back over to you. Those are the main things that stand out for me in setting them up for success, I think.
Well, I think to your last point there, when horses are raised in the positive way that I described, we build resilience. And so they become more adaptable to new situations.
Mhm.
So even though they're not accustomed to the specific situations where training happens, they have developed a more optimistic view of life that says they anticipate that good things will happen. And if there's changes or new things, they anticipate that those will be okay because life has been okay. So with that anticipation, and then the patience from a trainer like you who gives them the time to adapt, then I think they're really in a good frame of mind to adapt and be able to get right into the kind of training that you can do with them then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fun journey. I love young horses. Anyway, before we get cut off, I did you wanna I wanna know what happened with the little weaning story with that cute little guy.
Well, if we get cut off, I'll have it on my blog.
Okay.
So his mother decided to wean, and so the owner sent the mother to my farm with huge apologies for how I was going to be so distraught by all the screaming I was going to hear. And the mare got off the trailer, looked around like, "Oh yeah, I know where I am. What's the plan for today?" Not one scream out of her. Meanwhile, back at the farm, little Tiger looked around for mom, didn't see her, went to one of his aunties and said, "Can I nurse?" She adjusted her posture, let him try. No milk there? Okay, I'm going to go play with the big boys. That was the meeting story. No stress. Everybody was happy.
Oh, I love
Now let me tell you. Now here's where little Tiger is now. He is a driving pony for an older couple. Their grandchildren ride him, and he is only 6 years old. So he grew up
Oh,
to be very reliable, very young.
oh, that's so wonderful. I love that. I just recorded a podcast with Lee McLean in Canada, and we were talking about the merits of a versatile horse, and it sounds like little Tiger here is just that. You know, you ride them, you drive them, you play games on them, you take them to town, you do everything with them.
Right. Right. And that's because he had the kind of upbringing that built his confidence. Where wherever I go, life's going to be good.
And how long was that? Do you remember? Was it 8 months that they weaned?
Right. It was right about 8 months that his mother decided it was time to wean. But it was really the mother who said, "I'm kind of done with this kid. I've done my job. He doesn't need to nurse anymore."
Do you know
And
where the like 5 or 6 months norm came from? Was that a financial thing? Was that based on I'm truly ignorant about it.
I've never heard any explanation of it either. Now, friends from England tell me that in England, standard weaning is more like between 6 months and a year. In this country, I hear people weaning at like 3 and 4 months, which is absolutely appalling. That is a recipe for a stressed out disaster of an adult horse. So I think maybe it came from show stables and racing stables, and then people think, well, this is our role model. And they are doing it strictly for economic and convenience
Yeah.
reasons.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, and that's a lot. You've given us a lot to think about. Certainly, you should be able to find that info if you go and purchase a horse that, when they were weaned. That's obviously very important. Well, this has been
Mhm.
really fun, Lynn, and for once we're not going to get cut off. We have 1 minute left. So I'm going to remind listeners that I will post the link to Lynn's article in the show notes below, and we will look forward to catching you all in our future live chat.
That's right.
Well, good to see you, Lynn, and we will see you
You
we'll
too.
see you again. Thank you.
Next month. So long.